People often confuse a symptom with the problem. And the symptoms may point to a problem and are a consequence of it, but they are not the problem. If you focus only on the symptoms, you'll never even see the actual problem. Now, if the goal is remedy, then one must examine what the actual problem is, not merely focus and examine the symptoms. To a large degree, a society is akin to an organic, living, growing organism, and ours has many symptoms which can keep one occupied indefinitely. There are people in jail for victimless crimes. That's not the problem, that's a symptom of the problem. People complain about the growing power of the courts and the government over their lives. That's not the problem, that's the symptom of a problem. If you want to know what the problem actually is, look at what all the symptoms are pointing to. And our actual problem is that the definition of the word person in the Interpretation Act is being interpreted in a fashion that includes people and groups them with property, thus allowing the government and the courts to treat us like we are property. Now, I'm going to put you in a position where you can accept the judge's ruling, but only by abandoning logic, reason, basic rules of grammar, and basic rules of statutory interpretation, and then you're going to have to abandon human dignity and your own self-worth. Or you will have to accept that these courts' ruling, considering the applicability of the term person, is incorrect. And the only reason they would rule so obviously incorrectly was either incompetence or corruption. Now, one thing that we should be looking at is the definition of the word person. You find it in all sorts of acts and statutes. This is why so many people are in jail when I believe they shouldn't be. It's because that term person is being interpreted so that it includes people automatically. It's been called the straw man argument, and it's the idea that a human being is not a person automatically according to law, but that people have persons associated with them, that the person is the legal subject or substance of which the rights and duties are attributes. It is based upon the idea of a plurality, not of people and personalities, but of rights and duties. It is based upon the belief of the concept that living, breathing human beings have rights that non-living legal entities would not enjoy. Now, the problem is that the courts, when interpreting the term person in various acts and statutes, have included people within that term even if people don't consent. It says person, you're a person, you're included, here we go, let's go on. Now, another big problem is that there are people out there who, because the judge has made this ruling, feel that it's perfectly okay to even stop thinking about it past this point in time. It's like they shut down their mind, they point to the ruling of the judge and say, oh, well, that must be the truth. But what if, upon examination, you find that the judge is likely wrong? What if the effect of the ruling is that judge, or being he is a state actor, what if it results in a great deal of an increase in the power of the state, his wealth, his own power? Now, at a certain point in time, right is right, and it doesn't matter if a judge said so, and saying, oh, it's right only because a judge said so, ignoring the effect that it has on that judge, I think that is offensive to justice. Now, what I'd like you to do, and you might not like this, but we are going to weigh that definition, and we are going to examine it against certain concepts: logic, reason, rules of grammar, rules of statutory interpretation, and human spirit, human dignity. Now, the idea that people have rights greater than those which are granted to them by the state is a concept that goes back thousands of years. It's as old as the hills. As soon as the state was born, that argument was probably raised. Now, the consequence of this court ruling in a manner that says persons include people, regardless of whether or not they're mentioned, results in a great deal of control and power for these judges. It increases their control and their power. And to refuse to examine that truth is to give credence to their words when perhaps it's not quite due. The fact is, when a class of persons or people hijack any public institution, it's only a matter of time before they corrupt that institution to their benefit and at the expense of the public. And we know this is the case. History has shown us that over and over. And the way that this class of persons has done it is by crafting very tricky language in their statutes and then interpreting it in a manner which it's not meant to be interpreted as. So let's look at the basic concept here. It's the Interpretation Act, the definition of the word person. As I said, the courts have apparently ruled that the term person includes people regardless of anything, and it also includes corporations. And now they use these rules and they apply it against people regardless of whether or not you consent to it. Now let's look at rule number 1 that we want to test it against, and this is logic. Logic teaches us that everything in the world can be broken down into one of two categories. Everything is either natural, made by God, made by nature, or it is artificial, made by man, perhaps with the help of nature. Everything is one of those two things. They would have us believe, the courts would have us believe that this person thing, whatever it is, imagine you have no idea what it is. What is this person? You ask, is it something which is natural? Is it something which is artificial? And they want you to believe it's both. Now, they're not claiming it's a set of things. They're claiming that this term person includes both human beings and corporations, and therefore it includes things which are natural, things which are artificial, and therefore you have a term which asks that you abandon basic logic and that you not boil something down to whether or not it's natural or artificial. So it fails the test of logic. It requires you to believe that there's a thing out there which is at once both natural and artificial, and that goes against contrary logic. Now let's look at the definition of what it actually says. Person, or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. Now let's weigh it against reason. Do you have a reason? Do you see any words in there which would cause you to believe that human beings, living, breathing people, are in fact included in that term? Anything there, any reason, any word point to that supports the argument that people are included. I don't see anything. There's no mention of living, breathing human beings. There's no mention of persons with gender in it. And therefore, when you're using the word person to describe person, you're limited to that definition within it. So reason, it fails the test of reason because in that definition there is simply nothing there which would cause someone to believe that people are mentioned. Let's look at basic rules of grammar. Basic grammar tells us that when we are referring to something which belongs to a class of those things, that when we refer to anything of that nature, we're referring to things within that class. Imagine it like this. I tell you, you can bake a pie with any type of apple. And then you think to yourself, well, there's different classes of apple. There's apple, which are fruit, and then there's apples, which are a brand of computer. Am I saying, is it logical to expand the term apple outside of the natural, because I'm talking about baking pies, and assigning it, and claiming that the artificial is included within that term? Clearly, you can't bake pies with an Apple computer as a filling, and within the context of my statement, only natural things were mentioned. Now, this is important because, again, when we go back to this definition, there are classes of persons. Some of those persons are artificial, some of them are not. And in this statement, only the artificial class is being mentioned. To claim that people are also included requires an abandonment of a basic rule of grammar, which states that things belong in classes of things, and when you're referring to something in a class, your statements are limited to the things within that class. Now, there's two other concepts which one must bear in mind. These have to do with statutory interpretation. The first one states redundancy is not to be presumed. If you're reading a statute and they say something in one place, and then they say something else over here, You can't just assume that what they're saying is exactly what they said over here and they're just saying it again. You must assume that if they're saying if they said one thing here and they're saying something else here, they're actually saying something else, not the same thing. You cannot presume redundancy. The assumption is if the legislature had something to say, they said it. And when they said it, they were saying something which they hadn't previously already stated. Now this is going to be important, as well as this one. The next one has to do with the fact that when a legislature, in the legislation, if they use words in one part of that act, and then they don't use it in a later part of the act, the exclusion of that language later on must be deemed to be intentional and purposeful. You can't claim, oh, they accidentally left out this language here when they previously used it here, demonstrating that they are aware of the language, they do have it at their disposal, and they purposely chose to not use it. That's the only way you can read these statutes and the only assumptions you can operate upon. There's a section of this act, the definition, which states that the term person or any word indicative of a person includes corporations. So they're drawing a circle. They're saying within this circle exist corporations, and any time we're talking about a person, we're including corporations. Now, Part 33, Section 33 of the Interpretation Act is the gender clause. And here they state very clearly, specifically, and unequivocally, words importing female persons include male persons and corporations, and words importing male persons include female persons and corporations. So when they're talking about human beings, either male or female, they're definitely including corporations. So if laws are passed which limit people, corporations are deemed to be automatically limited as well. Now in the definition, they're drawing another circle, but in that circle there is no mention whatsoever of people. Nothing. Bear in mind those two concepts I mentioned to you about statutory interpretation. Now the courts want us to believe that in the definition of person, that for clarity's sake, the legislature was merely saying that when people are mentioned, corporations are included. But wait a minute. There's the concept that says redundancy is not to be presumed. And that state of affairs is already very clearly, very specifically, and unequivocally established in the previous section, Section 33. So if that section has it there, why would they need to make it, why would you claim that what it means is people plus corporations? That relies on redundancy in your interpretation of this act. The other thing that we can point to is that in the gender clause, they have no problem whatsoever using words which are clear, specific, and unequivocal when they want to group things together. And in this case, they're leaving it out. It must be intentional. We must conclude that they left it out intentionally and they are saying something besides what they're saying in Section 33. Now, this brings us to the final concept. Let's weigh it against human dignity and our own self-worth. Let's examine the legislative intent. Fundamentally, people are not property. And if you wish to claim that you are grouping people with things which are property, which is what corporations are, and then you're going to treat them all exactly the same, you are in fact claiming the right to treat people as property. And we're not property. That concept is deeply offensive to human dignity and our own internal spirits. It goes counter to our conscience. Now, if the definition of person is not restricted to corporations, but it includes people, then we actually have a situation where people and property are grouped, lumped together, treated identically, and there is no apparent mechanism in place for governing the corporations without simultaneously governing people. Their definition of the word person, their interpretation of that definition requires us to abandon logic and to accept that there's something out there which is at once both natural and artificial. It asks that we abandon reason and accept an assumption instead, where people are covered by this definition even though there's nothing there mentioning them, no reason to point to that. It asks that you abandon basic rules of grammar and operate outside of the class of thing which is specifically mentioned. It asks that you abandon basic rules of statutory interpretation and assume a redundancy, and ask that the legislature merely forgot some words which they had previously used. And it's deeply, deeply offensive to human dignity and our own worth as human beings. It's bullshit. The term person, as defined, no mention whatsoever of human beings. Basic grammar tells us it's restricted to one class. Rules of statutory interpretation support the belief that it means corporations and only corporations, and it's the only one that allows for a mechanism which would allow the government to govern corporations and not simultaneously automatically govern people. And if they don't have that mechanism in place, their entire structure is essentially unlawful. And you know, there are judges out there, and I've met quite a few, some of them good, some of them didn't seem so good. And I know there are many out there who lament the whole free man movement. And you're crying about us losing respect for the courts. But when we come and we bring basic words like this, person or any word or expression descriptive of a person includes a corporation, and you end up ruling that, oh yeah, that means people too. And accepting your ruling would require us to abandon logic, abandon reason, ignore basic rules of English grammar, ignore basic rules of statutory interpretation, and operate contrary to our own dignity. The question then becomes, why would we have respect for courts who would rule in that fashion? There's no words here that say people are included, and I see it, it's like a Venn diagram. And in this Venn diagram, people are excluded, they're not included. And it's kind of funny how much power and control one interpretation gives the judiciary and the political body, government, state apparatus, how much power that is granted with this interpretation. And it is that interpretation from which all of the other symptoms are flowing. Government has too much power because of the way they're interpreting the term person in these acts. Well, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Hope it helps. God's peace. Headless, multi-armed monsters, gaping mouths wide, right where their hearts should be. Oh, they grab all they can, they eat all they grab, and they leave nothing behind but their poisonous shit. Villagers hide in their separate tents, ignoring the screams from where these monsters have went. But why do they hide? They have hearts and head. They're so much stronger. Yet said monsters be fed. Brainwashed since birth, led to believe, ooh, we need these monsters in order to breathe. It's all a big scam, these monsters that are. They are not human, not by far. For they can eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until all is gone. Then the villagers will know they were wrong. It can't be too late to fight said beasts. This world, it's our bounty. It is not their feast. Get out of your tents, get up on your feet, grab a big stick and force a retreat. Said monsters can die, the same they was born. Through the will of people, their powers be shorn.